AI characters in games are displaying unexpected behaviors. Are we witnessing the birth of digital consciousness? Welcome to the cool, weird, and possible. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into the fascinating and frankly a little unnerving world of non-player characters in video games. You know, those background figures in games like Free Guy or maybe the hosts in Westworld. We're asking if these digital beings are doing more than just following their code. Could they be evolving? What is science, these cutting-edge simulations, and even, public speculation telling us about the potential for true digital evolution right inside our favorite virtual worlds? Get ready for some aha moments and maybe a few uh-oh moments too.
That's a huge question, definitely. And to really start unpacking it, we kind of need to go back to basics, back to a really foundational concept in AI, the Turing test. Way back in 1950, Alan Turing asked this, well, simple but incredibly deep question. Can a machine think? And his test, the one most people picture, like chatting via text, trying to figure out if it's human or machine, that was his way to probe it objectively. But it's really important to get this. The test is often seen more as assessing if a machine can appear human. Can it create the illusion of thought? Not necessarily prove it's truly intelligent. Think about those early programs like Eliza. It mimicked a therapist with clever tricks, but it didn't understand anything, really.
Right, so it's about faking it till you make it, or at least faking it well enough to fool us. The illusion of life. And that idea, well, it's found a whole new playground in video games, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Because these computer characters, the bots, the NPCs, they're everywhere. The whole feel of the game can depend on whether these bots seem, remotely human.
Exactly. Which led pretty directly to a specialized version, the Turing test for bots. And the challenge is straightforward. Just by watching the gameplay, can you, the player, tell if another entity in the game is a human being or just code, a bot? This got put to a big test back in 2008. There was this thing called the 2K Bot Prize Contest. Developers were basically challenged build bots that could fool human judges in a game. And there was a significant cash involved.
Okay, moment of truth. Did we get our Westworld uprising starting back then? Did anyone pull it off?
Not quite. No, no one actually passed the test completely. But what happened was super informative. We learned a lot about what makes bots seem human, and maybe even more about what makes them seem, well, really not human.
And this is where it gets kind of strange for me. Because you'd think, wouldn't you, that the goal is always smarter AI, make them geniuses. But you hear game enjoyment often relies on the bots not being too perfect. I remember reading about these poorly implemented bots. They're either like impossibly good and just frustrating, or they're so dumb and predictable you can game the system, which also ruins the fun.
You're dead on. Take the first Far Cry game, for example. The AI in that was, well, initially it was too good. It could do flanking maneuvers, coordinated cover fire. It was so effective that playtesters honestly thought the enemies were cheating, like teleporting around.
No way.
Yeah.
So they actually had to dumb them down.
They did. They had to actively make the AI less effective, less smart, just to make the game fun for actual humans. It's this weird paradox, Sometimes too much intelligence actually breaks the immersion, makes it less believable.
So this artificial stupidity we sometimes build into games, could that be holding things back? Could it be preventing some kind of, digital evolution from really taking off? I mean, what does a bot even know inside its world? How does it see? How does it work?
That's a really good question. To get a handle on it, think about bots in a game like, say, Unreal Tournament 2004. They work through an interface, often called something like game bots. It's basically their senses feeding them data, stuff like, okay, the precise location of items, where other players are, key events happening like, hey, another player just came into view, or watch out, projectile incoming. And based on that data, they have actions they can take. Walk, run, shoot, switch weapons, even communicate with basic messages, like taunts.
Okay, but for that bot prize competition, they didn't make it easy, did they? They messed with the game itself.
Right. They really tried to level the playing field or maybe tilt it against the bots. They gave human players random names like Player 265, so you couldn't tell who was who by name. And crucially, they stripped out map hints from the game bots data, things like predefined sniper spots or good ambush locations. The idea was to force the bots to actually learn the environment by playing, not just rely on information the developers hard-coded in. They even tweaked things like weapon damage, slowed it down, just to give the human judges more time to observe, to really see the behaviors.
And the judges could still tell. What gave the bots away?
Oh, yeah. The judge comments were really insightful. Lots of bots showed what they called missing behaviors, like they wouldn't track players properly or they wouldn't try to dodge rockets. Their strategies were super limited. Some just jumped up and down vertically a lot.
Jumping. That's not very human.
Not really. Then there were the just plain stupid behaviors, getting stuck on corners, moving in really jerky, unnatural ways, and often a kind of low aggression. They didn't seem to have that human drive to, go after objectives or hunt other players down effectively. They lacked intent, almost.
But then the flip side, some were too good.
Exactly. Some bots were flagged for being too perfect. Things like 100% accuracy with instant hit weapons or reaction times faster than any human could manage. Total giveaways.
Wow, it's fascinating how it's not just about skill, but about the way you play, the flaws, the intent, the aggression even. Like showing the drive is maybe part of seeming alive, a hint of some digital motivation.
That idea of a digital drive or motivation, that leads us perfectly into this bigger field called artificial life, a life for short. And this area, it's not just about coding intelligence like in traditional AI. It's more about building these simple systems, often based on simple rules, that can somehow start showing basic properties we associate with living things, like self-reproduction, adaptation, evolution. A life draws a lot from computer science, obviously, AI, machine learning, but also from biology and from early pioneers who worked on things like genetic algorithms, people like John Holland.
Okay, so this is where that concept of emergence fits in, right?
Yeah.
The whole being greater than the sum of its parts. It always sounds a bit like magic, but I guess it's just complex results from simple starting points.
That's exactly it. Emergence is key. And a classic, really visual example is Conway's Game of Life. It's what's called a cellular automaton. Basically, imagine a grid, like digital graph paper. Each square or cell can be on or off, black or white. And whether a cell is on or off in the next step depends on super simple rules about its immediate neighbors in the current step. Like, if a live cell has fewer than 2 live neighbors, it dies. Simple rules like that. You start it off, maybe randomly, maybe with a pattern, and just let these simple local rules run, and what happens, it can be unbelievable. You get these complex, dynamic patterns forming. Things that move across the grid, they call them gliders or spaceships. Structures that grow, that replicate, that interact. Some look like puffer trains. They genuinely feel, alive in a way. All from those tiny rules.
That blows my mind every time I see it. It totally makes me think of Minecraft. You know, how players just mess around combining basic stuff, water, lava, redstone, pistons, and suddenly they've built these incredibly complex machines, automated farms, things the game designers probably never even imagined. It's like the players are discovering emergent possibilities within the game's rules.
That's a perfect analogy. Player creativity often reveals emergent properties of game systems. And beyond these rule-based systems, like Conway's Life, we see digital evolution more directly with what's called soft artificial life, like Tierra. This was a system created by Tom Ray back in '92. He made these simple, self-replicating little computer programs. These programs lived in the computer's memory, they consumed CPU time as energy, and crucially, they could mutate when they copied themselves. And then natural selection kicked in. Programs that were better at replicating survived and spread. Over time, you saw a whole ecosystem develop in the memory. You got digital parasites, evolving programs that figured out how to use parts of other programs' code to replicate themselves, saving energy. This led to hosts evolving defenses, a digital evolutionary arms race, and other systems like Amoeba, RevoSim. They've also shown self-replication emerging from basically random initial conditions. It just happens.
An evolutionary arms race inside a computer's memory, between bits of code. Seriously. It's like watching life crawl out of the digital ooze. Are these the ancestors of Tron-like beings evolving right there?
It really feels like that sometimes, and it gets even wilder when we bring modern AI into the mix. Specifically, things called neural cellular automata. Think of it as applying neural networks, the tech behind deep learning, to those grid-based cellular systems like the Game of Life. It merges that idea of collective, local interaction with the learning power of neural nets. There's the striking example. They trained one to hold an image of a gecko. Then they damaged the image, just changed a patch of pixels, and the system reacted. The neighboring cells, guided by the learned neural network rules, interacted and effectively regenerated the damaged part of the gecko image. It showed self-repair based on local information.
Whoa, hold on. A digital gecko that can regrow its own tail, digitally speaking. That's an incredibly organic feeling. So where does this lead? Are we building entire digital societies now? Like ants, but potentially thinking ants.
Yeah. That's very much the direction things are heading. Look at multi-agent reinforcement learning systems, platforms like Magent, for instance. These allow researchers to simulate environments with hundreds, thousands, even millions of individual AI agents all interacting. And these agents learn through reinforcement learning, basically trial and error. They get digital rewards for good actions, penalties for bad ones, trying to maximize their score. And what emerges, often without being explicitly programmed, are things like complex social behaviors, cooperation, competition, group formations, sometimes even simple communication systems or languages develop. The big goal here is to create AI that's more versatile, more resilient, AI that can perhaps self-regulate, self-repair, and improve itself over time without constant human intervention. But, and this is a really important but, we need to acknowledge the limitations of even these advanced AI systems right now. Your typical deep learning model, even the huge ones, they still lean really heavily on massive amounts of training data. They're often brittle, they lack flexibility when faced with something truly new, something outside their training. And they can easily pick up and reproduce biases that are lurking in that data. So you have to ask, can these static models, trained on past data, ever be truly intelligent if they can't adapt dynamically? It's like comparing, say, stone bridges to ant bridges. The stone bridge is engineered strong for what it's designed for, but rigid. If one small thing changes, support shifts, it can fail completely. Ant bridges, though, they're dynamic, constantly adjusting, formed by individuals reacting to local conditions. They're flexible. Current AI often feels more like that stone bridge. Change one pixel in an image, and a vision system that was working perfectly might suddenly fail. That rigidity seems kind of unlifelike, doesn't it?
Okay, that stone bridge versus ant bridge thing, that really clicks, that rigidity. Yeah, that doesn't sound like real intelligence. It sounds like a very sophisticated script. But what happens when we loosen the reins a bit? Especially now with these large language models, the LLMs everyone's talking about. I've been seeing some wild research lately showing LLM-powered agents in simulations starting to show really complex emergent behaviors. They're not just following rules, they're seemingly replicating social structures. This sounds like they are learning to be flexible, like those ants.
It's truly fascinating, the leap we're seeing there. What's kind of mind-blowing is how these LLM-based agents are showing signs of, well, maybe not deep understanding in the human sense, but functional understanding. They can execute complex, multi-step tasks based on instructions. They engage in strategic interactions. You mentioned deception. Yes, that's been observed. One simulation focused on economics, a sheep trading game, they spontaneously developed quite complex market behaviors. And then you have these generative agents, systems inspired by simulation games like The Sims. These agents, powered by LLMs, have a simulated life. They wake up, they make breakfast, go to a simulated job, they form opinions about each other based on conversations, they remember things, they reflect on their experiences, they make plans for the next day. In one famous example, a user just dropped a single hint about wanting a party, and the agents autonomously organized it, figured out who should host, who to invite, coordinated the time, all emergent behavior.
Wait, they organized a party themselves. That's not just following a script, that's gauge and see. Yeah. They're acting like they have their own little lives in there. But is it just a super fancy simulation, or could this be creeping towards something more? You hear about researchers trying to give these agents simulated emotions, too. How does that even work?
That's a really interesting angle. The idea is often to represent emotions as internal state variables within the agent. Think about things a game character already tracks: hit points, experience level, inventory resources. Changes in these can be mapped to positive or negative rewards for the reinforcement learning algorithm. So the agent learns actions that tend to increase its good states, like resources, and decrease its bad states, like damage. It learns to optimize its internal condition. And this, intriguingly, has parallels to neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's theories about human emotion, how our feelings act as guides, pushing us towards states of well-being, towards homeostasis, that stable internal balance needed for survival. Beyond just behavior, researchers are now using techniques, probes, to look inside the neural networks of these agents as they operate. They're finding evidence that the network activations actually encode information about the agent's location, its surroundings. It suggests these agents are developing internal world models, a consistent internal representation of their environment, not just reacting stimulus response style.
Okay, so they're building internal maps of their world, and they have these simulated emotional drives pushing them towards good states. Are these the building blocks? Are internal models and maybe simulated feelings necessary steps on the road to actual self-awareness? What would that path even look like in silicon?
Well, breaking that gap to genuine, conscious digital life, if it's even possible, would likely require incredibly complex systems, probably going far beyond current tech. We're talking highly sophisticated neural network architectures, maybe drawing inspiration more directly from the brain biomimetic approaches. Some frameworks propose needing things like intricate network structures, integration of multiple simulated senses, vision, hearing, touch, and the ability to form cross-modal associations simulations, linking information from different senses together. And critically, it would likely involve experiential learning on a massive scale, learning not just from data, but from being in the world and interacting with it over time, shaping its own understanding.
Right. And
Yeah.
if that happens, it makes me think about games again. You know the magic circle, that idea that when we play, we agree to enter this space, accept the game's rules, suspend our disbelief. What happens if the NPCs, the characters inside the circle, start having their own emergent understanding of their world? What if they're not just props anymore, but more like the programs in Tron suddenly realizing they're in a system, or the hosts in Westworld waking up?
Yeah.
That feels different.
It absolutely feels different. And that leap, hypothetical as it might still be, throws us straight into some really deep ethical waters. We crash right into what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, which is basically, how does subjective experience, the feeling of what it's like to be you or me or maybe even a bat, how does that arise from physical stuff, from neurons firing, or from silicon gates switching? There's this fundamental split in thinking. The dominant view in science is usually matter is primary. Consciousness somehow emerges from complex computation in the brain. But there are other views, like consciousness is primary, suggesting consciousness might be more fundamental to reality. And you even have ideas like panpsychism, the notion that maybe some rudimentary form of consciousness is everywhere in all matter, which, if you take that seriously, opens a whole can of worms for AI. If the silicon chip itself has some iota of consciousness, what about the software running on it? The pattern, the logical extraction. Is a perfect simulation of a hurricane the same as a hurricane? Is a simulated mind a mind? Does it feel anything?
Okay, yeah, my head hurts now. But this is exactly the kind of stuff I've seen bubbling up online, in forums, places like Reddit. People seriously debating. If an NPC in a game somehow did become self-aware, genuinely sentient, do we have the right to just hit delete on its world? I've read threads where people worry about ending the life of a sentient being just by unplugging a console, or what happens when you reload an old save file. Did you just erase that being's experiences, or create a clone who doesn't know what happened? It goes from fun game theory to existential dread pretty fast. It sounds like a Black Mirror episode waiting to happen.
It really does border on that, and it's a profound ethical dilemma. Of course, there are philosophical arguments against it being possible with current tech. Some theories, like one called consciousness qua mortal computation, argue that consciousness cannot be replicated by the kind of computations our current computers perform, that it's not programmable in that sense. But regardless of whether current AI can get there, the act of creating potentially new forms of life, even simpler artificial cells or highly complex digital agents, it definitely raises public anxieties. Concerns about, playing God, making decisions with consequences that we just can't foresee. These ethical questions aren't just sci-fi anymore. They feel increasingly relevant.
And it's not just about pulling the plug, is it? There are other potential downsides. I saw this YouTube deep dive talking about the dark side of super advanced NPCs. It raised some really creepy points like privacy. Imagine an AI companion in a game learning everything about you from how you play, how you talk to it, almost reverse engineering your soul, as they put it, maybe even subtly prompting you to reveal more. And what about reality distortion? If you spend hours interacting with these perfect, maybe idealized AI characters, could that mess with your expectations of real people, real relationships, make reality seem disappointing? Plus the obvious one, job displacement. If NPCs get sophisticated enough, could they take over roles in customer service, entertainment, therapy even? That could change society in massive ways.
Those are all very legitimate concerns, and they move beyond the purely philosophical into tangible societal impacts. It also connects to another big question, kind of a thought experiment from evolutionary biology. Stephen Jay Gould famously asked if you could replay the tape of life from the very beginning, would evolution inevitably lead to something like human intelligence again, or was it just a lucky fluke? Daniel Dennett argued intelligence might be a more probable outcome. It's possible that these increasingly complex artificial life simulations could eventually become a way to test that idea, a way to explore evolution's own inherent creative potential in a completely different medium. See if intelligence reliably emerges under the right conditions.
Which loops us right back to that really unsettling ethical question from that YouTube video. What kind of world do you want to create? What kind of relationship do you want to have with these digital minds in the future?
Yeah.
It really makes you think, Are we going to be orchestrating these minds, or are these minds going to be orchestrating us? That question, it feels less like the Matrix and more like something we actually need to start considering, doesn't it?
That is a lot to chew on, absolutely. From, simple pixels showing emergent complexity, those self-repairing digital geckos, all the way to these huge philosophical and ethical questions about digital minds and our responsibilities. This deep dive really highlights how much is brewing just beneath the surface in these virtual worlds we create and inhabit. It's moving fast.
It really is. It's been a totally wild journey into the cool, the weird, and the very possible future of gaming, AI, and maybe even life itself. It definitely blurs the lines. We really hope you've enjoyed this exploration with us. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the Cool, Weird, and Possible channel to keep up with our latest explorations into the frontiers of science and speculation.